Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, 15 minutes to solve how to invest sustainably, as my 2-year-old daughter might say. Easy peasy, I promise you, easy peasy. She's 2. I've just thought on the way here, I was 2 when I moved into this house. This is the bog standard front slide I use in all my presentations. And it occurred to me on the way here that we think sustainability is new. This house is 100 years old. It was designed by Australia's most famous architect. It's where I grew up. It's where my parents still grow up. They believed in building from the soil. They believed in using the resources around where the house was built. You can see the Sydney sandstone. They believed in small footprints. They didn't believe in underground cinemas or gigantic car parks. They believed in small rooms, living at one with nature. And before them in Sydney was the home of the Camaragal tribe just here. They spent 6,000 years in the North Shore of Sydney, and Australian Aborigines have gone back as far as 60,000 years. I wonder whether we're going to clock up such an impressive record no matter what we do. We should be very, very humble when it comes to sustainability. Now, I say it's going to be easy peasy, but I'm also a little bit nervous. The last public speech I gave didn't go as well as planned. Baroness Werner was very, very inspiring about getting to know and befriend your inner voice. Sadly, my inner voice didn't tell me not to tell the Miami underwater joke in my last speech, and this was the result. Front page news all around the world, which ultimately resulted in losing my job. So note to inner self today, don't say anything bad about Miami, don't say anything bad about Miami. Okay, how to invest sustainably then? To answer that, of course, we've got 2 important words that we need to get to the bottom of. The first one clearly being, what do we mean by sustainable? And I'm not going to linger on this for very long, as most people do. I think it's of secondary importance. There are as many definitions as sustainable as there are people in this room, and it's basically everybody's individual choice by what they mean by sustainable. Even in my ex-industry, before I became a journalist and was head of responsible investment, it could have meant anything from ESG, or the E or the S and the G, the governance, the society, the environment. For some people, it means the long term. For some people, it means putting values ahead of value. For some people, it means culture. It means a whole bunch of different things. It can mean green for some people. The word sustainable in finance is beginning to mean net zero, but it can mean a whole range of things. And I think we get caught up a lot in the definition of sustainability. But to answer how to invest sustainably, it is my view, and the crux of my speech today, we get lost around the word invest. Now, we throw around the word invest all the time. I'm an investor, I'm investing in that. What should we invest in this year? But do we think very often by what we mean by invest? You may think, oh, I know what investing means, it's patently obvious. But actually it can mean 2 different things concurrently sometimes, and this can cause a huge amount of confusion. And if we untangle this mix-up in the word invest, this will give you the tools to walk out of this room and to be able to invest sustainably for the rest of your lives. The first definition is what I would call financing. It's giving somebody your money, simple as that, or withdrawing your money, as simple as that. But very often we talk about investing, but we actually mean trading. It's really nothing more than passing something backwards and forwards. And we need to be very, very careful by what we mean in order to invest sustainably. So what is the first one? Just to go into a little bit more detail. Somebody comes up to you with a business that they really like and said, please, can I have $1,000? You want to invest in a venture capital firm that's supporting a growing business. Private equity is what's called primary financing. It's the direct handing over of money to a business, or a business that you don't like withdrawing your money. Very, very simple. But in that action of handing that money over or withdrawing it, you have a huge amount of power. And if you want to invest sustainably via financing something or withdrawing capital, please do so. This really is the best way to have an impact and to change the future of our planet. Money matters. Companies are vulnerable when they're asking you for money. They're terrified when you threaten to take it away. This is the absolute cutting edge of where you can make an impact. Sadly, however, the majority of people think of investing and it's just trading. And the biggest asset classes in the world, the equity market at 130 trillion, the bond market at roughly the same amount, is trading in secondary market securities. Imagine VW makes a Golf and it drives around and then you sell your Golf. VW has no idea that you've sold your Golf to somebody else, nor does it care. It got the £20,000 the first time it sold the car. It is irrelevant to them that you've sold it and then it gets sold on and it gets sold on and it gets sold on. The secondary market is where we spend most of our time talking about. It's what we spend most of the time writing about at the FT. But for every seller, by definition, there's a buyer. And for every buyer, there's a seller. And the company already has your money. That's why equities are called permanent capital. The company gets to keep that money no matter what. Sure, IPOs are slightly different because you're handing over your money, but they're a very small proportion of the market. Most of us spend most of our time buying and selling in the secondary market, and it affects almost nothing. Worse than that, if there's a buyer for every seller, you selling your coal shares or your oil shares or your cement shares doesn't rid you of any responsibility or doesn't make the world any better. Unlike the second-hand Golf that is eventually run into the ground and will be crushed, that equity doesn't go away. There's a buyer. So all you're really doing by selling your coal shares is throwing your proverbial rubbish into the next door neighbour's lawn and making it somebody else's problem. They, by definition, are now the new owners. Imagine we're the whole market in this room, but you all want to sell your coal shares. It's impossible. So regulators or governmental bodies or interest groups trying to make us all divest our bad companies, it can't happen. By definition, by mathematics, half of the room has to buy it. It has to be that way. Worse, it's immoral from a certain viewpoint because unlike the analogy with the VW, you actually have something slightly different as an owner of a Golf. When you own an equity, you can vote. And this is very important. You actually have a say in VW when you drive around in your Golf. Likewise, if you own the equities in a coal share, you can vote. You can change them. So why the hell would you want to sell? Why would you give up your right to affecting change, making it somebody else's responsibility, when you could be the one to ask that coal company to dial down its emissions, when you could be the one to challenge management, when you can be the one that goes onto the board by drumming up enough interest and changing the destiny of a company like Exxon? It's immoral to expect somebody else to do it. Hold on to your shares and vote and affect change in that way. Okay. Now we understand this concept between the primary market of financing something and the secondary market of just trading, how to invest sustainably across a few asset classes. Let's just go through them very quickly so we understand. How to invest sustainably in any old business, a friend's business, a parent's business, a venture capital business, a startup. This is the first example that I gave. This is when somebody wants your money. As I said, this is where you have leverage and you should walk away if you don't like what they do. If you do like what they do, give them your money. This is where you invest based on your own prejudices of what you think sustainability means. It may mean the environment for you. It may be investing in a company that has low levels of stress or low turnover or high gender equality on the board. It will be up to each of you to decide what that is. But this is a very easy path to invest sustainably when you're giving money directly. The problem is, what is a sustainable company? And as I said, you all need to reach the decision yourselves. In the listed market, and when companies get bigger, of course, you might want to invest in your friend's startup renewables business. You know what it does. But for large companies, they can be a mix of good and bad. There are oil companies that invest $1 billion a year or more in renewables. There are recycling companies that are doing good over here, but they also build tobacco cartons. There are fantastic renewable startups with horrible governance. The reality is that it's very difficult to define what a sustainable company is. And regulators and governments don't give us a handbook. There is no rule. Hopefully things like the EU taxonomy will help us here, but it certainly shouldn't be up to investors or journalists or CEOs or anybody unelected to tell us what a sustainable company is. Is it a company where they're doing more good or less bad? Is it a proportion of revenues? Is it a proportion of profits? Is it simply doing something which is considered harmful? You have to make up your own minds. And I think this is the genuine regulatory failing at this point, that there's no clear definition of sustainable. What about equities then? As I said, how to invest sustainably in the equity market, which is probably the one that we read about the most and that you're most interested in, is clear. And I take a contrarian view here. I do not believe that excluding stocks from portfolios either makes a difference or is moral for the reasons I gave before. You should hold on to those stocks, because if you don't, you're merely forcing somebody else to own them. And by owning them, you can drive real change by affecting management decisions, grouping together, and you can do way more owning those shares than by discarding them. That's how you invest in equity markets. Yes, say no to an IPO if a bad company comes along, because that's primary issuance, that's financing. But in bog standard equities that are traded round and round and round, fear not in owning them. Indeed, embrace it. Likewise for bonds. Bonds are slightly different to equities. Yes, they're traded, and you should feel no compunction about owning them. It's no problem at all. Same reason. There's a buyer for every seller. But the difference between bonds and equities are it's not permanent capital. Every 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, companies have to come back and ask for another loan. And at that point, if you don't like what the company is doing, you step away and saying, I'm not refinancing you, I'm not giving you any more money. But again, do not be scared of owning the credit, but just don't give them any more money when they come begging for more. How do you invest sustainably in property? Same rule applies. In a traded REIT or a fund which owns lots of property, feel free to invest in anything. Again, using that piece of paper, your right to change, to make property companies greener, to make them more equitable, to make them build in the right places, to make them build stronger buildings. And again, this isn't just a green story, as we've learnt at Grenfell, as we've learnt in Turkey. Sustainability means a lot more than net zero when you see toppled buildings that have defied building codes. But if a company's coming to you asking for financing directly, by all means make sure they're doing absolutely everything properly, or deny them your money. What about commodities? Finally, a tough one. What about the gold on your hands? This is relatively easy because 99% of the jewelry market is recycled gold. But what about some of the more difficult things? What about something like oil, from which 80% of the world's energy is still derived? Should we be dumping our shares? I've already said it doesn't matter. Should we be not financing oil companies? We can't turn the lights off immediately. It's in my view that we need to make these companies transition, and we need to make them transition quickly. Most scientists believe we need to halve our oil consumption within the next 11 years to reach a 1.5 degree Paris target. So yes, we need to be on their necks all the time. But to do that, by goodness, own the shares and deny them direct financing. Ditto all the other industries that require commodities like copper and aluminium and so on. You can't deny the world the things that they need to grow. But my goodness, we can make sure that they are instigating the best practice green and sustainable management techniques as they do so. Because think of what happens as well if we aren't the ones doing it, owning the shares. They sell to the private sector. It disappears from public view. And this is already happening in the coal industry, for example, as big pension funds sell their shares, forcing companies to sell their coal divisions or their fossil fuel divisions. They disappear into the private realm. We never see them again. They run for cash. They turn up the volume as hard as they can. It's worse for the planet in the end. Far better to keep things out in the light where we can see it. So to conclude then, I've given you a framework rather than telling you exactly what to invest in. Think of the word invest and to split it in two. When you think about how to invest sustainably, think, is this money I'm giving over directly to private equity, to venture capital, as a loan, as a credit? Is it something I can withdraw? Or am I just trading a piece of paper around and around and around? And what is that paper giving me the right to do? Because that piece of paper has a huge responsibility with it. And why would you give it away? It's the last thing you should do. So if you want to change the world, you want to invest sustainably, you have to have impact. And you have impact either by financing things directly or withdrawing finance, or by owning shares in the secondary market and doing the right thing by those shares and affecting change in that way. Thank you very much for listening.